Now, we always come to you last, Glenn, so why don't we have you talk about orange first in this round?
Yeah, well, I think, the pattern, if I understand, and keep in mind, I've only known about spiral dynamics for maybe a week because John tweeted about it and I listened to this podcast and I'm thinking about it. So I'm just saying how I think about it. I'm not saying how it really is, but the way that I've understood it, there's pros and cons. Come to an awareness of the cons and you respond to it. And so the cons in blue, especially if we're talking about a religion and we're talking about this codified mythology, is that these stories aren't really true. That's kind of the big thing for I think a lot of us and a lot of this audience that would recognize, oh wait, all of these stories, beliefs, superstitions, things that tied me to the group, now I'm starting to question them. My awareness is expanding beyond this literal interpretation of them into, wait a minute, now what do I do with it? And what if it's not true? When you get evidence, you go, oh, that's not true. And I want to link myself, and again, it's a very individualistic response. I want to link myself to something that is verifiable based on empirical data, based on evidence. And because we live after the scientific revolution, there's already been kind of this culturally orange permeation in our society. We have places that we can go. But I think that's what orange is. Orange is a response to blue, to say not that necessarily the things about blue that were beneficial we're going to sweep under the rug and get rid of it, but how can we fix the problems of blue? And I think that's why you see that sometimes there are blue type thought processes, blue type views of the world that still exist in what you would think would be an orange place, because again, these aren't isolated colors that you graduate from one to another. They're layered all inside of us now. And so those things that were so beneficial to us in those blue stages are going to manifest themselves in others. So I think orange is just that exploration and saying, prove it.
I love it. Now, Gina, I want to get you in on orange, and I just want to ask, is it unfair? And this is sort of when historical criticism maybe comes into play. Is it unfair to sort of judge the Old Testament from an orange perspective? In other words, when somebody says, oh, the scriptures are worthless because Noah's flood never happened, isn't that trying to apply orange thinking to a text that never was intending to be orange? Talk about your understanding of orange and then how it relates to scripture and faith and other things.
Oh, I think if you think about the highlights of the orange V meme, you're talking about Enlightenment and Renaissance. You're talking about like a huge a shift in consciousness, particularly in the West. And so if you, but I think lives, in many respects, there's two things working at the same time. There's a rationality about orange. There is this need to understand and to kind of create a science out of something. So I think good hermeneutics leads us, the good hermeneutics of orange leads us to ask contextual questions so that we can actually appreciate the text as a purple text. So sort of not one without the other. I mean, on the far side of it, we can say, okay, rationality would suggest that we need to just dismiss the Old Testament as the wafflings of like a mountain tribal community that, established like a, huge religious tradition. But on the other hand, orange leads us to understand mythology and how narratives work and how humans work. So it's sort of vital. Does that answer your question? And I kind of felt I was a bit waffly about that.
Yeah, no, and I don't even think I was very clear in my question, other than just to say that I don't think everybody, let's just say 500 or 1,000 years ago when they're talking, or 2,000 years ago when they're talking about the creation myth, are necessarily really thinking about things like, was there a literal first couple? How does this fit into the evolution of mankind? When we tell the story of Noah's flood, are we really thinking that water flooded the earth in every nook and cranny, or are we just trying to tell a story that's going to have symbolic and moral value to people? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Lindsay, how do we bring you in on orange?
So I actually like the orange framework to explain ex-Mormonism rather than blue, because we talked about this. I'm one of the people that's always saying, don't become a mirror of yourself when you leave the church. Don't just become as righteous outside of the church as you do in the church. But the framework here works better for me because the orange stage was such an important part of my development, and in many ways, orange to me was about deconstructing the blue. And so if we take your arc example for example, we say, okay, well, the arc's not literal. Logic has shown me, orange is a new way to think. It's a new way to look at the world. And logic says that the arc couldn't have happened. And so, but orange is still in that way where it's like, the arc never happened. We know it didn't happen. And as we move up to other models of thinking, we show, well, maybe the arc didn't actually physically exist, but it still matters. But in orange thinking, it's like, it didn't exist. Stop with that nonsense. And so it's not really a mirror of blue, but it's like Glenn said, it still has some of those characteristics. And that's why I think I like this for ex-Mormons better, because in some ways you are flipping your paradigm and becoming a mirror of yourself when you question the church. But that's assuming that people are like coins that flip over rather than evolve and progress. And that's why I like this model, because it allows for evolution rather than just a black and white way to think of things.
Love it. Jamie, talk to us about orange.
I think the easiest way to see orange is sometimes looking at it from how blue perspective look at orange. So when you hear things like, I don't know where I would be without the church, that is thinking that you can't have any framework beyond, Mormonism. That the big fear is if you abandon this greater good, this tribe, that you become unethical, you have no morals, you have no sense of right and wrong, you completely lose yourself. It's the where will you go if you're not in our boat? And we use this fear of orange as a primary motivating factor. And yet, orange is a pretty powerful place to be as an individual, where you think, I can listen to my inner voice. I can make decisions about me and my family that might transcend or be different from the tribe for my own personal reasons, and I don't need to feel the guilt and shame from the tribe because of them. It's a simple decision, like for us, a big thing is going out to eat now after church on Sunday. It's a super awesome family experience. The pressure is off of me to try and provide this meal, the stress around it, and yet the tribe looks at it as a terrible thing. The orange part of me, and they say it's immoral, it's unethical, you're violating a commandment, and I look at this and say, this is honoring me as a person more. I don't have to be a slave to my family. I don't have to contribute all of this. We can go and do this. And it ends up being one of the most transcendent family experiences that we have, right? Because you take all the pressures and all the work away from it, and you're able to enjoy family time together. But the Blue organization does not look very kindly on something as simple as a family dinner at a restaurant on Sunday. And yet, from a personal and family point of view, this is such a beautiful experience of putting the priorities of family time and quality time, and using the limited time we have together well.
Love it. I'll just add, and this is building on what all of you have said, and particularly, I think what Lindsay said, and that's that, we need to look at each color as having strengths and weaknesses. And obviously, and there's a really good point that they make that we'll talk about in a second, which is whatever meme you're in, whatever place you're in, you look back on the previous memes with disdain. You kind of look down, you kind of shrug your shoulder and turn up your nose to the past sort of V memes, and then you look forward with fear. And I think that's a good point to bring. But to kind of extend what Lindsay was saying, if we look at the pros and cons of orange is great in the sense that it relies on data, it's analytical, it's maybe the least superstitious or magical thinking. It's more alive, it can be more vital, it can be more truer, more grounded in reality, but it also has weaknesses. It can become very mean-spirited. It can become very critical. It can become very destructive. It can. One of the things that spiraled, that the Liturgists podcast talked about, is that when orange people start destroying blue, it can put blue people back in red. Do you guys remember that? In other words, if you think about a lot of the crazy things that are happening in society today, we think, those of us in orange, and I'm not saying I'm in orange, but the orange mentality might say, let's destroy blue. But what happens if you destroy blue and everybody goes back to purple or red? Are we really better off? And so, orange has its virtues, but it also, try organizing orange people. Try getting orange people to gather together for a cause. Jamie, you're wanting to say something.
And I think this is the source of so much of the conflict in the Middle East, right? As the civilization
Yes.
Becomes more Western, becomes more my mind just lost the word, more less
secular,
relying less on secular. Sorry, as they become more secular, you see the rise of Sharia law and the desire for an Islamic state. You see that the leaders are no longer content to rule over a blue sort of situation, and they revert back. So I think you can see it not just on an individual basis, but macro, and all the world's conflicts sort of revolve in this.
Totally. And that's what the Liturgist podcast used. The Middle East is a great example. If you think about how progressive and secular countries like Iraq and Iran and Turkey used to be in the 70s, and then all of a sudden that whatever that was got blown up, and what you saw is those civilizations actually regressing to previous states that could probably be described as very red. And those situations can be very dictatorial and very violent for all, and very primitive for all. Afghanistan too. A lot of these nations have been destroyed as we became a little bit careless about the value that blue can provide.
I think we've seen that in the U.S. as well. And a couple of months ago, I was watching for the very first time, surprisingly enough, the first season of Saturday Night Live. I'd never sat down and watched all of the episodes, and I think that was 1975, 1976 when those were being aired. It was so liberal, politically progressive. They've got Candace Bergen and Gilda Radner just sitting on the stage having a conversation about feminism. And it's the same types of conversations that we're hearing now, but what happened between then and now? There was some kind of a regression where I don't know. So I think we see that same pattern here, and maybe it's just as people are raising their awareness and we're talking about values. That's what the V in V means. The values that they have, and trying to understand where those values lie. What are the pros? What are the cons? There's a lot of push and pull and give and take in that.
And it's always easier to see it in someone else than to see it in ourselves.
Yeah.
It is very difficult to be, self-reflective sometimes about where we are along this continuum.
And on that note, I was going to say that using American politics in this last year since Trump was elected, I like to see myself engage in other colors, but this election has set me into blue, into orange, into red, probably the most. I mean, really reactive, sometimes almost animalistic, when Trump was elected, all I did was eat a bag of Cheetos, no joke. I was beiging it the entire night. So I think that's what, this idea that we fluctuate in this spiral, I think is really important, because I don't think that I'm developed enough to talk about politics in a way that I want to, that fully appreciates the wholeness of the story. But sometimes it's just really fun to talk about politics in red,
Yeah, it's fun, but it may not always be constructive. And we know about the backfire effect that we can actually create more resistance and more social stagnation if we don't watch our rhetoric, right? But it certainly can be fun and at least cathartic to go red or beige. Yeah, so, and I would even say that to some extent, many people who have tried to explain the ascent of Trump, it's almost a reaction. They try and say it's a reaction to overly orange or overly politically correct sort of analysis of the State of the Union. And there's a lot of people that feel alienated by these sort of elitist, politically correct sort of conversations. And because we maybe didn't bring the whole nation along into a conversation about multiculturalism and enlightenment and maybe some higher values, we saw some of the earlier colors rise up and say, hey, you're not going to orange us into your reality. We're going to have to do this conversation together. And if we're ignored, then we're gonna see progress retard a little bit until we can all kind of get on the same page. So anyway, that's orange, and that takes us to our final color in this sort of basic analysis of spiral dynamics before we move to the second tier phases of consciousness. But the final color that spiral dynamics gives us in this base sort of framework is green. And green is, again, orange was more individualistic. So now we're going back to the communal again. And green is basically saying that, no, wait a minute. What if it's possible that that all of these different colors have value, that lots of different stories have merit, that everyone's story needs to be considered. And it's very sort of non-hierarchical. It's very grassroots, sort of grounded. It definitely values spirituality over religion. I think it would value grassroots politics over corporate politics. It would value, let's just say, sustainable farming and local sort of farmers markets and local consumption of goods over sort of Walmart, big box corporate sort of thinking. And so that is sort of green, this sort of communal progressive consciousness. Gina, would you talk about green first?
Sure, and I like green. I was trained in green, particularly when it comes to critical theory. And if you think about the timeline, I think green appears about 200 years ago, as there's sort of that kind of Greek, Aristotelian, and Platonic and Socratic worldview or hermeneutic people become wary of it and asking themselves questions about their own existence. So existentialism, those French and German philosophers, Sartre, Nietzsche and Derrida, Lyotard, all of these philosophers emerge, these kind of continental philosophers emerge and jump into the scene, and they ask questions about our own consciousness, and they point to this sociocentric quality that we've lost in our grasping and falling all over to get what we want. So they draw us back to the idea of community and group and this idea of love and personal growth and harmony. And so they say, look, basically the existentialist creed is, I feel something, therefore I am, and let's pay attention to what we feel.
Love it. Jamie, why don't you talk to us a little bit about green?
So because it was Martin Luther King this week, and because I was reading about spiral dynamics as I was going, I came across this quote, and I thought, oh, this is a true sentiment, and I really could relate to it and recognize where I kind of needed to change. He says, on the one hand, we are called to play the Good Samaritan on life's roadside, but that will be only an initial act. One day we must come to see that the whole Jericho road must be transformed, so that men and women will not be constantly beaten and robbed as they make their journey on life's highway. True compassion is more than flinging a coin to a beggar. It is not haphazard or superficial. It comes to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. And I thought, oh, this is a green sentiment. You know, that charity has no place in green. Revolutionary restructuring so that we don't have winners and losers is a really green sentiment. While charity has a place, you know, providing peanut butter sandwiches to homeless people while alleviating an hourly need does nothing to help a greater need. And this green sentiment on how to structure civilization, how to structure the work that we do as individuals, how we structure the way we spend our time, and the change and effect that we want to have, and the legacy we want to leave behind, probably warrants greater self-reflection and better use of resources to provide benefits far beyond the charitable acts that meet the needs in the moment, but that will go on to meet long-term needs and create a better world for us all to live in.
Love it. Glenn, talk to us about green.
Well, I think it's following the same pattern. In orange, we had kind of this individual awakening that things in blue had problems. Those things, from my experience, I kind of went through the orange and the green in almost the same time, because, you know, if my blue experience was the church, and especially the mission, after my mission, when I started going to graduate school and attending a university that wasn't BYU, then kind of that orange mentality started requiring me to be a little bit more rigorous in the claims that I was making and the evidence that I needed to support those claims. And that went from kind of an individualistic orange to a group green very quickly, because I was in graduate school. So green's kind of more of this progressive, liberal, recognizing the shortcomings of blue, where you've got very strong us versus them societies. And green asks, well, what about the them? Let's stop villainizing the other. Let's have value for everybody, whether it's LGBT, whether it's gender inequality, whether it's the church is a bunch of white guys from the US. It's not really a global church. You know, there's this awareness that there's other people out there on the margins that are suffering as a result of this blue organization. And so green is more of a people coming together, agreeing that we need to look out for the people that have been disenfranchised. So I think that's green. There's like in everyone, there's the pros and the cons, and I think in green there's a con that's really interesting. A couple of months ago, I was very lucky to meet Jonathan Haidt. I think many of you know who Jonathan Haidt is. Was able to do an interview with him that will be published in a couple of weeks on the Luminous Brain podcast. Michael Ferguson plug. And one of the things that Jonathan Haidt said in that interview is that there's this culture. He didn't call it green culture. We didn't talk about spiral dynamics, but he said there's this culture of people that have been raised, I think, you know, born after 1995, I generation, whatever it's called, that have been taught that you cannot challenge somebody's lived experience. If you invalidate somebody's lived experience, that's an act of violence. And so as a result, because green is so averse to violence, that it's very accepting, it's very relativistic, it accepts all kinds of things, and you can't really have a discussion or a debate. It's a hard discussion or a debate without people feeling that they've been harmed or injured in some way. And so it shuts down real discussion in that sense. I don't know. He said it better than I just did there. But so I think that's where green is. One of the things that the podcast we listened to talked about is you'll have movements like Occupy Wall Street, or, you know, things like that are very green organizations, but because they're green, it's hard for them to get anything done because they can't make everybody agree with everything. So that's one of the challenges of a green.
It's like the Judean People's Front clip from the Monty Python's Life of Brian, where they're sitting around arguing about, you know, they're trying to gain consensus before they make some sort of a make sort of decision, but because everybody has to be equally respected and valued,
Yeah.
and all different perspectives have to be factored in, very little actually ends up getting done.
And so, the group part of the blue and the bureaucratic group part, I think, is still can be evidenced in green in that way.
Interesting. Yeah. Lindsay, talk to us.
I have a lot of feelings about this color, just because I've spent a lot of time in the last few years, I think, in this color in the work that I do. So to use my life as an example,
Meaning Sunstone or meaning FLDS stuff?
Both, but I'm going to use polygamy for just a minute, because I think Sunstone's more developed than I am. So I started off the Year of Polygamy podcast hating polygamy, thinking it was terrible and awful, and that was sort of my blue, or sometimes even my red feelings about it. And then as I learned more, I realized it was more complicated. The logic in the orange sort of disrupted that. And then I came to a place with the green, which is, okay, we know that there's a problem here of inequity, and yet I have all this other evidence that shows that it's more complicated. What do I do with it? And the green in me says, well, how does my approach feed the human spirit? Like, what is missing in my approach? And so green was my attempt to reconcile it. But as Glenn said, it does have some problems. I have sometimes found myself overcorrecting and sympathizing with things that need more accountability. I deal with a lot of criminals in this practice, and in my goal to understand how people get here, sometimes I leave out the accountability piece and don't give that enough weight. And so what I do is, people will say, well, you're just giving these guys who have done horrible things a pass. And in my mind, it's the green. Like, what about the others? I'm trying to understand how people get here, because if we can understand how they get here, then maybe we can correct the problem. But I think green is a good starting place, but it's something I've been struggling with too, which is, we have these good theories, we have these good rules and accountability, but how do we feed the human spirit? And green is an attempt to reconcile those things, I think.
It's not easy being green.
There you go.
Nod to Jim Henson. I really liked this analogy that the Liturgists podcast used. They basically said, as a way to sum up these different 6 V memes, they said, if you were going to sell a car to each of the V memes, here's how it would go. To a beige person wouldn't have a car. They'd be walking around carrying sticks or whatever. A purple person,
sex, having lots of sex.
Having sex, right? No, don't even need a car because you're just having sex. No, a purple person, you would sort of use the bandwagon effect, and you would tell them who's buying it. So it would be sort of like, all the cool kids are doing it. Join the club of the cool kids. Very tribal. Actually, Glenn, your joke sort of bled in, because a red person, if you're going to sell a car to a red person, you would use things like sexuality, power. It would be like a Corvette. It would be a Camaro. It would be sort of the macho, buy this, and a woman, eating a cheeseburger with a bikini as the car, sitting on the car. That would be the way that you would sell a car to a red person. A blue person would be sort of the Chevy built on American values, sort of the America, home and mother and apple pie sort of way that you would sell to a blue person. To an orange person, you would sell a car by basically telling them all about the statistics of the car and the safety and the horsepower and the velocity and all the different sort of stats that go into buying a car. And then finally, to a green person, you would basically say, save the world and buy a Prius. If you buy a Prius, you'll be contributing less to global warming and helping eco-friendly environments throughout the world. So that's a summary of the different colors. Now what I'd like to do is turn this sort of analysis on some various aspects to Mormonism. And I'm just going to throw these out to the panel, and I want people to sort of answer it. Does anybody want to give sort of a view of Mormon culture and history through this lens? And Lindsay, maybe I'll start with you. Do you want to try and take a a quick stab at the evolution of Mormonism within these lenses, and then we'll ask Gina next.
Are you asking if Mormonism follows the trajectory of these colors?
I'm saying, as you think about these colors, and then you ponder about the evolution of Mormonism, is there anything that sticks out?
Well, I mean, yeah, I draw parallels all the time to that, but I think that the way that I like to think about Joseph's early church is actually has a lot of green in the beginnings and actually goes to blue as it develops. I mean, that's how I see it in the history, and that's super reductive. But I think that at different times, if you're looking at an institution, institutions adapt different strategies for survival as they go along. And so it's different than individual development. Does that make sense?
Sure.
So I think with the church, I mean, the church, to me, like I said, like Dallin H. Oaks, he often embodies blue to me. That doesn't mean he's blue. It's not a label. But to me, he's a representation of this black and white legalistic thinking. Mormonism isn't always lived that way for a lot of people, though. I mean, in my lived experience, I said, you know, I had a lot of magical, superstitious thinking. That is what Mormonism was to me for a long, long time. And it really wasn't black and white. It was more based on these sort of stories and myths and things like that. So I don't know that we can say that I don't see Mormonism developing along the spectrum, if that's what you're asking.
That's fine. I was curious your point. Jamie, what do you want to say?
Because I think this is the core of this philosophy, which is that we spiral. I feel like, you know, once you arrive at green at the top, you're kind of navel gazing, you want to change the world, but the way to change the world is to start a blue organization and come up with a mission statement and then get everybody aboard. And you need purple people who want to do this, and you recruit based on, you know, the tribe that you're doing, and you spiral down, and then the organization grows, and you spiral back up, and you spiral down, and then you spiral back up. I think that it's fluid. It's going back and forth. So I totally agree. I think Joseph Smith probably had some deep thoughts, you know, this is what I like. This is different from the other church. I don't agree with these other things. I have these great thoughts, you know, how are we going to do this? Let's all get together, have a school of prophets, you know, we can all commune one with another. But the reality is, in order to organize any sort of movement to affect the change that you want, you know, you move back to blue and you experience persecution, you spiral down to purple and you spiral down to red. You know, you have to protect your territory. And, you know, I think you can watch Mormonism go down and up and down and up. And I think you can watch every organization, and I think you can look at it in your own self. You know, yeah, you sit around and meet with your friends who share the same values and ideals that you do, and you think, you know, what can we do to make this better? Well, you create an organization and you have a mission statement and you do this, and you know, this is the beauty of it, is that one level is not superior to another, and that you can build forwards and backwards.
I love it. Gina, what are your reflections on Mormonism and spiral dynamics? Can we say that the modern Mormon church is a blue church? And then what else do you want to add?
Oh, I think and I'm going to revert to faith development theory. And, you know, what you seem to be positing is like a kind of a pastoral question, which is, you know, what is, and faith development theory would say, we need to look at a nodal development level. Like, what are we calibrating at? And I think most certainly we're calibrating at the blue level, but as Jamie said, we have bits of all, institutionally a blue level, but, you know, institutionally we have all of those colors represented and flaring up at various times. So in terms of a pastoral approach to this locus of development, or the locus, you know, this concentration of I suppose ministerial and missional effort is certainly looking very blue. But the question is, how does it maintain that broad spectrum of sensibilities along its own spiral of development or dynamic? I keep using development, sorry.
No, it's great. It's great. Glenn.
I don't know that I have anything to add to what's already been said. I think I'm pretty comfortable with what's been said. You know, it's interesting to think about the world that Joseph Smith lived in, and the question that I have is, Did he grow up in a very blue world? That's what the culture, the society was like at the time. And with the folk magic that they had, was that kind of their version of science, that maybe he saw some of the problems in blue and started expanding his awareness into some of these orange areas and using some of the folk magic as a way to create a new blue organization. And then Brigham Young comes around and he ratifies it. I don't know. I could play around with those ideas, but I haven't given it much thought, really.
I'll just say, and it's never good to disagree with Lindsay Hansen Park, but I do think there's a little bit of a mapping on from my reading of Mormon history. You could see Joseph Smith early on as a shaman in a small tribe. You could see that there's a lot of mysticism in early Mormonism, and a lot of tribalism. And then you see Mormonism maybe go a little bit red with Brigham Young, where he becomes a bit of a dictator, and there's a lot of emphasis on strength, and sort of a dictatorship, really. And then you see, as polygamy gets jettisoned, at least post manifesto, and as we see Mormonism move into the 20th century, you see the corporatization of Mormonism, and you see it becoming a lot more like IBM, a lot more bureaucratic, a lot more kind of stiff and rigid, but also highly developed, highly structured. The handbook of instructions, the dress code, all the different correlation sort of activities to make it a lot more like McDonald's than it was maybe the original church. And then what you see in the past few decades is the attempt to apply, and it starts with B.H. Roberts maybe and others, but it certainly catches on with Dialogue and Sunstone and Sandra Tanner, and then even entering into the Bloggernacle and the podcast communities of the past 10 years. You see us trying to really apply evidence and science and enlightened views to Mormonism. And that's really, I think, what Sunstone and Dialogue and all the past things of the 10 years are about. It's basically saying what's true, what's not, what holds up to science, to scientific scrutiny, what doesn't. Let's question authority, and where is the church falling short in terms of taking care of people on the margins. And so now what we have is people like the A Thoughtful Faith community, like Faith Again, like Sunstone, honestly. It's these groups that are saying, wait a minute, what if there's more than one way to Mormon? What if you can be a progressive and a liberal Mormon but stay in the church? And what if there's value as a stage 3, Fowler stage 3 Mormon, but also let's validate the stage 4 with more pastoral apologetics, but then let's strive for a Givens, sort of a neo-apologetic Givens, Bushman, Patrick Mason, like big tent Mormonism, where all of the different players can be valued. Now, Lindsay, do you just totally reject, that as a potential sort of way to frame Mormon culture and history as it's evolved? Does that make you sick inside?
I'm so sick. No,
Does that make you want to eat Cheetos?
I think it's a very yellow approach to Mormon history, but for me, it's still like too linear for me. Like it's valid, and I agree with it that could be one legitimate interpretation. But for me, I just don't see it as linear. I think that there have been times when they've gone to all different strategies, as everybody does. I think there are colors that adapt better with institutions. Blue and orange. Orange is one of them, but it doesn't really show up in Mormonism. So I think, I don't know, it's too linear for me. But I take your point.
Okay.
We're agreeing and we're not agreeing. How about that?
I love it.
A few years ago, I started and stopped pretty quickly a project that I called Early Mormon Audio, where I was reading books, and one of the ones that I did and didn't finish was Key to the Science of Theology, I think is what it was called. It was Parley P. Pratt. And And he was so excited about how Mormon teachings lined up with science. So to say that there wasn't an orange V meme at play, even in the 1850s, 1860s Mormonism, I think there was. I think that was part of what excited early converts to the Mormon church, is that they started to see there's more than just this traditional stagnated blue culture and organization. There's more out there, and their understanding of science and magic and stories, and we can debate how accurate it was now, but I think the experience for them was this excitement at being able to validate their religious experiences based on what they saw as scientific evidence in the everyday world. So I think that's definitely a part of Mormon's evolution. It is mainly blue, a little bit of orange, a little bit of red, and just kind of that whole blending thing.
Jamie, did you want to add something?
I think it's just a very healthy way to look at our own cultural experiences as, moving up and moving back down. I think the hard part is I do feel like we're in a retrenchment. I do feel like we're in a spiraling down.
You're saying specifically with Russell M. Nelson, Thomas S. Monson, Russell M. Nelson, with Uchtdorf being jettisoned, with Oakes being brought into the first presidency.
Those things, the things that actually concern me the most occur, at the local levels. For example, one of the new things they do over the last, 5 to 10 years is, no longer are people given topics with which to research for, say, sacrament meeting talks. Instead, they're given somebody's conference talk for them to just read and then re-give. We've moved to where individuals don't have a voice in the community, and your job is to take in somebody else's positions and just regurgitate it back to the congregation. We've elevated authority so much that individuals don't have a voice. So those sorts of behaviors and controlling behaviors are more concerning to me than the leadership at the top. For most people, their lived experience of Mormonism occurs in their ward with the members that live close to them. But, right now, I have no idea how people think. I don't know if in their mind they're having orange or green thoughts about, doctrinal issues or about morality or about ethics. Because when they're given a topic to speak on, their job is to regurgitate what a leader has already said, and that's the authority. You don't have any personal authority. And I feel like that's where we miss out on the richness. You talk to people, 20, 25 years ago or prior to correlation, I think Mormonism experienced a much broader, people's individual thoughts were valued. I feel like we're not individually valuing people's experiences.
Gina, do you agree that do you agree that maybe some of the modern movements of the LDS Church is maybe spiraling the church a little bit downward in the stack, so to speak? Do you have thoughts about how maybe even these new first presidency changes sort of bode for which kind of direction we're moving as an institution?
I think organizations are always, and particularly churches, are always in some form of motion. I'm actually really optimistic, I will have to say. I know this is unpopular about this new move of President Nelson because there's already intense fragility. But I suppose the everyday practice of Mormonism has been plausible deniability. This idea that, you can come along, Jamie can come along to church, I can go along to church, and there's place for us. But in many respects, this blue is just going to flare up because it's kind of the last ditch attempt to try and stem the I suppose the flaring out of that orange and green and even yellow sensibilities that are existing there. And Nelson yesterday showed his hand. Where there had been questions about 132 and polygamy, Elder Nelson basically said, my doctrine of women comes from a polygamous doctrine, a polygamous scripture. And I think that's great because that shows a hand, like to kind of shed away the rest of the colors and see where the dominant nodal development level is excellent. And it's not nice, but I think that in the arc of human history, we we always come up, it's inevitable that we come up against this moment, this last fortress of thought before that becomes intolerable and we break through that.
Are you saying that there's sort of a long arc of history and it bends towards institutions naturally, hopefully evolving from blue to more green institutions? Is that kind of what you're saying?
Inevitably, yeah.
And that's kind of what Protestant Christianity has, and Judaism probably both have done.
I think so. Yeah, and even Roman Catholicism.
Right.
They've had to let things go because they that promises to force them into obscurity, and they always want to be relevant. When you had the Second Vatican Council, was this an attempt to address these orange and these green questions that are bubbling around the perimeter of their faith life, and so they had to just let go of some things. I think this will be Mormonism. It's sort of, this is what will happen.
Yeah, and I think the Liturgists podcast made it clear that there is such thing as a green church or a blue church, and to make the point that no one level is better than another, or what, they made the point of try being a green person who's in a blue church. It doesn't feel very good to be a green in a blue church, and conversely, it doesn't feel very good to be a blue person in a green church. Imagine how somebody wanting structure and order and who's comfortable with tradition trying to go to a Unitarian church that is talking about saving the planet and global warming. Depending on who you are,
right?
Yep, exactly. To many people. As we close, because we have to kind of close.
Are you going to talk about yellow and turquoise?
Yeah, that's where I'm going right now. So the podcast ends talking about two final colors, yellow and turquoise, and it basically talks about these final colors as being sort of next phases of consciousness. So green is sort of the level of consciousness so many of us are aware of. When it puts forward yellow, it's basically saying that there's this new level of consciousness where you look at things in terms of a unified system, where you basically say all these different V-memes are interconnected. There's an emphasis on nonviolence. There's an emphasis on inclusivity. You can see the shortfalls in every V-meme, and you can see the benefits in every V-meme. And what your focus on isn't on fighting for whatever your perspective is, but instead it's seeking to unify and to respect all different paths for the good, to see them, the bad, for what they are, and then go forward. So now here's what I want to do with yellow. I want to ask Lindsay, Gina, and Glenn each to analyze their respective projects as it relates to these colors and tell us whether your respective organizations are seeing themselves in any of these colors, and specifically whether you're striving for yellow, as a way to sort of lead your organization. So Lindsay, are you comfortable sort of placing Sunstone anywhere along this spiral or not?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great question. So Sunstone has gone through a whole entire history, 40 years of it, where it's probably gone all over this spiral, been in many different colors. Yellow is a good place that the organization can be, but yellow is almost activist to me. Like it's almost like trying to solve the problems of the other colors. And Sunstone, I think, has a different goal in that it wants to be a place that allows the colors to sort of sort themselves out a little bit, if that makes sense. So we're trying to do.
Lindsay, can I just challenge you really quickly? I think green is activist. I think yellow is trying to say everyone has their place, and that's why I thought of Sunstone when I thought of yellow. But I'm not trying to disagree with you, but.
No, so maybe I'm just misunderstanding, but I understood yellow to be like, yellow is a response to the frustration that green can't quite come to a decision on anything, and so it wants to be a little bit more decisive.
Yellow is described as inclusive, as seeing everything as being connected.
Well, in that case, I would like to hope that that's where we're headed with Sunstone. We because we are trying to tie everything back to Mormonism. I always say this, I don't think we're the city of Enoch yet, but we are trying to allow it. And it's one of the few places that I know of where so many diverse people can get together. You know, stake presidents can come, young women's presidents, religious society presidents can come, hang out with Mormon fundamentalists and atheists and ex-Mormons and non-Mormons and everything in between. And so to me, that's the work that I'm really interested in right now, because like I said, I've been wounded by being in some of these other colors and by other people being in those colors. So we're trying to be a place where people can work out sort of this palette of development and allow everyone their place and their sense of development. And so I guess what I'm worried about the activist thing, because we're not trying to, Sense is not trying to change anyone's mind. We're not trying to keep anyone in the church or make anyone leave the church. Rather, we're just saying,
because that would be
you
green.
are where you're
That would
at.
be green. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You are where you're at. We're just, we just want to be here with you while you're there. So.
Yeah, I want to encourage you, Lindsay, to consider embracing yellow as the V meme for Sunstone, because I think that there's a good match there based on your leadership. So anyway, I love it. Gina.
Thanks.
Oh yeah, Gina, if I had, and I don't mean to, again, colors don't mean good or bad, better or worse. If I had to describe what I understand a thoughtful faith goal to be and kind of your ministry going forward, it would be to help explore ways that Mormonism can move from blue to green. Do you reject that framing of what you're trying to do? And if so, how do you want to frame what you're doing in your personal ministry and in a thoughtful faith podcast as it relates to the development of Mormonism?
There's a lot of questions in there, John. Can I deal with the first one?
Absolutely.
You have to answer them all and in order.
Oh, can you give me the first one again?
What are you doing? How does a thoughtful faith see itself in what it's trying to contribute to the Mormon stages of development within Mormon society?
Oh, this is really interesting. I think as it's gone along, I have been less interested in Mormonism. I've been more interested in creating a space where people can bring their questions of spiritual growth outside of the structures of Mormonism. So, we have homily. I'm starting to use like kind of the blue of that Christian tradition, the larger Christian tradition and liturgy, etc., to create an eruption in the certainties of Mormonism. So I don't know if that explains, but what's the outcome? I mean, I'm really passionate about growth, spiritual growth, or an enlargement of consciousness, I suppose that's what underscores it, but also to deal with the harm that's done by that inner critic that draws on the guilt of and the shame that's created in that blue space. I don't know. I feel like I'm waffling. So what do you think? Yellow is interesting because it asks lots of good questions. I hope that I do that. But it gets quite analytical. Doesn't really have a good end goal. It can be quite sort of cool.
Sure.
About the larger integrated questions. So I don't know. Maybe only a couple of weeks into 2008. So I don't know.
Sure. All right. Well, I just thought it'd be fun to try and see how we could apply each of our individual projects to this paradigm a little bit. Glenn, what are you thinking about this spiral dynamics as it relates to Infants on Thrones and the things you care about?
Well, before I talk about Infants on Thrones, I just want to make sure that we're kind of all on the same page what we mean when we're talking about yellow and when we're talking about turquoise. Because what I understood from the Liturgists podcast, they said that there's a division in spiral dynamics and people that accept, all the colors up to green, and they say that there's actually evidence that we can point to that shows that there's development in society based on these classifications and these V means. And with the yellow and the turquoise, you're like, well, maybe this is, if we're able to if we're able to predict what's going to happen, or maybe even what's happening right now, let's call that yellow, where the individual is waking up to the pros and cons of what came before and adapting to that. And that's kind of yellows in that individual space. And then turquoise is the group manifestation of all of these yellows coming together and trying to do it. Is that the way I understood it? Are you guys comfortable with that? Yeah?
Sure. This is just a chance. Yeah.
So if that's the case with infants on thrones, I feel like it's a lot of orange coming out of blue, with like striving to green is kind of, I think, what we were doing. And maybe that's still what some of the other infants are doing and where they are. We haven't had our V-meme conversation or our spiral dynamic conversation with the other infants, so I don't really know where they're seeing it. But if I'm looking at them and the project as a whole, I think what we've been doing has been, as people are coming out of the religion, which would be blue, and they're seeing things in orange that are problematic, we've been validating that. We've been doing it with humor and mocking and other things in kind of a green type of way. And did you say, John, that green, one of the goals of green would be to get people out of blue?
Not necessarily, no, but there's an activist flavor to green.
Okay, yeah.
That's all I'm saying.
So I think that's probably where infants has been. One of the things that was really interesting to me as I was listening to that Liturgists podcast, when they talked about yellow, they said that yellow is a chameleon. A yellow person hides. A yellow person understands the other V-memes, and they can mimic the other V-memes, and they can manipulate the other V-memes to achieve whatever their goals are. I think I've been yellow for a while. I think I've been yellow, and that's why Jake called me the TBM whisperer. Things where like I'm trying to step into these other V-memes, trying to understand it, trying to validate it, even if it's not popular. To do that, because an orange isn't going to want to say relativism is cool. So I think I personally am more of a yellow, and what I'd like infants to be is not striving for a green goal, but striving for a turquoise goal. And so like when Gina's talking about expanding spirituality, expanding consciousness, expanding awareness, that's awesome to me. And like a group of people who are doing that, to me, that's a turquoise group. And that would be my desired end goal for all of this.
I love it. I love it. And again, I see a lot of what Lindsay's doing in Sunstone as sort of a yellow / turquoise effort. And that's the spirit with which I brought you all together today. Jamie, you wrote something wonderful, which is that before your 5 children revert entirely to red and beige and declare war, you need to give us some final thoughts. So Jamie, as you read through this spiral dynamics, is there anything that you want to share with us to conclude that you think is interesting or relevant to kind of where we are 2018 in Mormonism and as citizens of the world?
I agree with Glenn. I really related to that chameleon effect. Like I really know how to blend in with whichever group I'm with, and kind of can take the value. I mean, people call it whatever they want, but pick and choose the values that I want right now, and it is not valued by any particular group. That chameleon style. I understand the label that I get sometimes of hypocrite or disingenuous or some of those. I can see how the other colors look at that sort of chameleon person and don't necessarily value that. But I value it, and it's working for me. It's working for my family. I'm definitely not holding it up as some exemplary way to do. Everybody is traveling this path, and I think there's just a lot of this overview and framework allows people to look at other people's stages and recognize where they are and what things. And I think it if you can sort of look at and identify what color you might think someone is experiencing, then it helps you to help them recognize the value of that, and also the costs that come with it. It provides you a framework for dealing with conflict. when things aren't going well with someone or with family members, or, with things that are going on. I think it's a nice framework. All analogies and frameworks have flaws, but I think for me, it allowed a lot of, I just found after listening to it, I had a lot to write about myself, just journaling and thinking about, what my personal goals are. I think this gives people a way to say, what personal goals do I want to work for? Which place do I want to be? And how can I help the communities and the people that I interact with better experience? Our goal is to experience happiness, right? It's to provide joy and to experience joy. I know it sounds so totally Mormon, but being happy is a great thing to want. I think it's a universal human desire. I think everybody would put happiness and fulfillment, at the top of their hierarchy of needs. And this just gave you steps of how to move towards it, and recognition that wherever you are on the path doesn't mean that you are not going to experience joy, that joy occurs at each level. But, sometimes you have to really revert to we need to win this war, or we want to win this game. If you're cheering for a football team, the way to experience joy is to have the cake match and the colors and the flag hung, and you bond together, and there's joy at each level. And I don't know, it's a nice framework for how to get groups of people all on the same page happy.
Love it.
All right, and I do have to sign off.
Thanks, Jamie Hanis-Handy. It's so great to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. Lindsay, do you want to give us some final thoughts on if or how this framework, might have some value for us or for you going forward?
Yeah, I think the only thing that I'll say that I haven't already said is I really like this framework because it allows for more complexity. It doesn't allow someone to be in a label, and it acknowledges that all of us have these characteristics, and it's not the wholeness of ourselves in the moment. Like I said, I tend to engage in blue and orange in politics more, but not so much in the work that I do with Sunstone. And so I think it's just a good framework for us to understand where we situate in how we look at the world, and then the application that I think would be useful to apply it unto ourselves is to see how other people, where they're at, and to recognize that there's no such thing as a blue person. Like I said, Dallin H. Oaks represents blue to me in the church, but I think in other aspects of his life, he is probably all over the spectrum like we are. And for me, that's a helpful shift to realize that we're all kind of in this together, doing our best, even though we have all of these impediments that we have to face and these challenges. People don't have to stay there.
I love it. Support Sunstone, support Year of Polygamy podcast. Lindsay, it's always a pleasure to have you on Mormon Stories.
Thank you, friend.
I'm going to give Gina the last word. So Glenn, any final thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, I've got 2 or 3. So I hope you don't have to wrap up too quickly. The first thing, there was something that they said on the Liturgists podcast that I thought was really insightful. And it was that brains make minds and minds make culture. And what I think that means is that the brain, our organ, the cooperation of all of the different functions that our brain does is what creates a mind or a soul or a person. That's what you are. It's your brain doing all these different things, all of the senses that you have, the awareness, the consciousness that makes a mind. Different minds working together create culture. That's a very interesting idea to explore. It didn't go to the next step, but my question is, what are different cultures that work together creating? What would that look like? And I don't have an answer to that, but it's an interesting question that came to me as I was listening to that podcast. So that's one thing I wanted to say in closing. Another thing, I think we've been saying that there really isn't one V meme that's better than another. I don't know that I totally agree with that. I think that there are certain contexts, certain situations where certain V memes are probably the best ones to be in. Gina talked about sex at the beginning. Being in a beige V meme in sex is way better than being in an orange V meme in sex, because then you're analyzing everything. No, you want to get out of that. So I think there's definitely, we can say there's places where one V meme is better than another. But I also think if you just look at this group and how harsh we were on blue, we can't really escape when you're in an orange and you're looking backwards. You're saying that all of these things are an adaptation of recognizing pros and cons. Well, what is a con, and what's the reason for trying to adapt to a con? You don't want to revert. You don't want to go backwards. We talk about Brigham Young as ruining whatever it was that Joseph Smith was trying to do, possibly. So I think it is complicated. It's not simple. Everything with this, there is some nuance, but to just say one V meme's not better than another isn't totally true. I can't totally buy that. So there's that, and then probably the final thing.
So wait, what is turquoise, Glenn? Is it the celestial kingdom, to go with your analogy? Where are we at with that?
No, I think turquoise. Turquoise is that Four Seasons song, "The Age of Aquarius," and what all the hippies were wanting at the end of the '60s, and they thought that the '70s was going to usher in this golden age. In religion, you talk about the millennium and these predictions of people living in harmony with each other, this idealistic utopian society. I think that's turquoise, and it's unrealized at this point. It's a dream. It's a vision of people that are yellow, which they recognize the value of all V memes and are able to set aside the judgments and bringing everybody together. I think is the turquoise ideal to strive for, but I don't think it's been realized anywhere. But I do want to say, if I can put in a plug for Infants on Thrones, that we're doing a listener essay contest, and I've got 5 essays from listeners right now. I'm looking for more. So if there's somebody wants to record something and say something, whether it's on this topic or anything about Mormonism, we're giving away $200 to the winner, $100 to second place, $50 to third. So if you're interested in that, our website, infantsonthrones.com, there's a section that talks about the essay contest. But that's it. And you're on mute right now, John. It's all in the service of creating the unrealized turquoise community. You're still.
Thank you, Glenn. It's great to have you on Mormon Stories podcast. I really respect you and what you guys do on Infants on Thrones, and thanks for your enthusiasm for this topic.
Yeah.
All right, Gina, you get the final word, Dr. Gina Colvin.
Oh, this is really cool, because I'm going to go all God on you.
All right.
And as we've been having this conversation, I've been thinking, well, how does God speak into each moment, each of these epochs? And I'm going to hold a very large metaphor for God, whether or not you call God the numinous, a deeper consciousness, or the more, or an energy, a vibration, a cosmic ecology, whatever it is. It seems that each of these epochs pulls us down into some kind of recognition of the more. And I think that each of these moments and times and different experiences have tucked, as it were, a kind of a secret of the sacred. All cultures, all times, all humans tuck within their kind of mystery and their esoteric a secret of the sacred. And so when we think about, it's very easy to default to this idea of spiral dynamics or stage theory as sort of a stage evolution. But I think, the final stage might be just pulling out all of our experiences, living with the complexities, the paradox, and asking at the same time, who are we as humans as we're dealing with A, the pull towards the more, and B, the practical effect of living with difference and diversity of experience. So I feel really excited about anything that raises our consciousness to whatever state that we're currently in. I think that, bring it all together. It's a matter of spiritual artistry to allow all of the parts that are spread across generations to rest in us and let them sing however that song sounds.
I love it. You got all God on us, Gina.
I did. Yay.
I love it. And if we're striving to be yellow or turquoise, then we're going to embrace it. We're going to embrace it all. So,
yes,
and you can't hide your light under a bushel like yellows tend to do. Yellows just want to hide under a bushel. You can't do that.
Yeah.
Can't do that. Not anymore. All right. Jamie Hanis-Handy, Lindsay Hansen Park, Dr. Gina Colvin, Glenn Ostlund. I love you all. I'm proud to be associated with you. And I'm very honored you would all join us on Mormon Stories. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you,
Thanks,
John.
John. Kia ora.
And all our listeners, thanks for joining us today. We've loved having you. Hope you've gotten some value out of this. We sure appreciated it, and appreciate all the comments and people who joined us live. Please join us again on Mormon Stories other times. Email us at mormonstories@gmail.com if you have questions or feedback. Support the Open Stories Foundation and Mormon Stories with your monthly donations. That keeps us alive and allows us to provide you with content like this. Check out our events page at mormonstories.org/events, because we've got workshops and retreats coming up. We've got an event with Carolyn Pearson. We've got an event with Tova Mirvis. We've got retreats and workshops coming up in the months ahead. Get ready for Sunstone. It's coming in July, and lots of Sunstone regional events along the way. And please stay tuned for more goodness on Mormon Stories, A Thoughtful Faith, Mormon Matters, Year of Polygamy, Infants on Thrones, and all the different podcasts out there. Take care, everybody, and we'll talk soon.